Welcome back. Today we're going to take a very quick look at TRN's Kirin. So Kirin, of course, is their initial planar set, and it is quite attractive looking. It's got some nice vents right there, a nice backplate with this little mesh pattern with a gold accent. But what really distinguishes TRN's Kirin from everyone else are going to be these replaceable nozzles. And it comes with a set of 3 that sort of looks like this. Up top, you got the transparency. The middle set, which is on the IEM right now, is called the reference, and the bottom is the atmospheric immersion. So what those look like in real life when you graph them out, sort of looks like this. Not a ton of difference between the 3. Immersion is sort of the most different one, and I think that is the one where they closed the diameter of the nozzle and made it, I think that it's actually the shortest one, nor it's the longest one. So if you actually looked at them from the side, you can sort of see they go from the transparency, which is the shortest nozzle, reference, which is the medium, and atmospheric immersion, which is the longest nozzle. So you can sort of see on the graph what those do. Immersion actually pushes this first initial gain peak to slightly before 2K, which is slightly odd. And the rest of the treble kind of drops down. But the other 2 are very similar. So maybe we'll touch on those in a bit, but maybe not. So let's kind of jump right into it and talk about what's happening with Kirin. So I will say that TRN sets of past year, almost 2 years have been, shall we say, spicy in the treble. I mean, they've really taken a liking towards a lot of sort of peaky treble, and those kind of sets were not so popular in the past year or 2, especially with Western audiences. So to have something like Kirin, which really doesn't have that really peaky, intense treble, was actually a good sign. So hopefully this is going to be a trend. But yeah, I will say it's actually very good for a TRN set, considering what they've recently put out. So definitely not as bad as some of the recent ones. But when you take it sort of together with the class of the 2022 planar sets, Timeless, S12, Panda, Muse, Hook X, the ones that I've actually tried, the S12 and Timeless, I don't think Kirin necessarily stacks up against those. It's very much okay at best. Very much a mid-pack, and it hits the mid-pack simply because of the price, because it's attractively priced, and it's sort of at the lower end of the class in price. So I think it gets a little bonus for that, but as far as sound quality and what people are buying planars for, I'm not sure it really lives up to that, but price-wise, it's okay. So my general observation with this one, it sounds okay, but you really can't A-B it with Timeless. Timeless is sort of set the standards, set the bar for what an affordable planar should sound like, and this one doesn't quite live up to that. This one is really tuned to sound like a TRN hybrid, or tuned to sound less planar. They did something to it intentionally to make it sound a bit different, and it's really hard to put my finger on what they tried to do. I'm not sure it was successful since it's a planar, and they probably should have almost copied and pasted what other people had done as far as what the treble should sound like. But as a pure planar set, it really doesn't do resolution and clarity and detail and separation and bass and treble in a way that has made sets like Timeless and S12 popular, super popular. It's just odd the way it sounds and what they really did to the treble to make it sound off and small. But that's sort of my general really big complaint. It just sounds very small, even compared to Timeless, which wasn't the biggest sounding planar, but this really, really sounds quite small, and the more I listened to it, sort of, the more it annoyed me. But the rest of it, it's not so bad. We'll kind of quickly walk through this. So the bass, like I said, it's quite okay. I was expecting something closer in weight to S12 or Timeless from the graph. It actually graphs very close to those two on the bass curve, but it feels a little bit lighter, which is probably going to work better for some. If you've listened to Timeless, that can sound a tad heavy. Not really, but it's a little bit, it definitely has a little more depth to it than what Kirin does. And I would say that this one doesn't really get a pass on the Unforgiven by Metallica. It just sounds kind of a little bit hollow and a little bit lightweight for what that track should sound like. The mids, and this is really where it should sound like a planar, and it really sounds more like a TRN hybrid than a planar, because it has sort of recessed mids, which is very odd, especially in this class of planars, to have something that sounds a little bit more recessed than it should. Very odd, like it was almost intentionally done that way to not sound like a planar. I don't know. I'm not sure what they were thinking. The detail and the resolution that you're expecting from a planar, it's just not there on Kirin. How you should have that strong planar treble should give you plenty of separation and layering, and instruments should have this great amount of separation and space between them. It just doesn't really happen on Kirin, so just not there. And like I said, the other problem is the stage width and height. Just noticeably smaller than Timeless. And Timeless wasn't all that huge to begin with. Timeless can sound flat and not have enough depth, but it really always had width and height. And I think Kirin is sort of lacking in most of the dimensions. So I'll say the mids are sort of okay at best here. And the treble, and I will say as a casual listening set, you just kind of pop it in when you get it. Not too bad. It's got this relaxed upper treble style. That 2K, like we pointed out, depending on which nozzle you're using, the 2K on the atmospheric, a little too far in. It's even before 2K. The other two were kind of just past 2K. It would have been really much better to bring this down just a hair or slide it out, and it probably would have balanced out the rest of those peaks and valleys and the treble out just slightly more. Probably added a little more upper treble sound to it instead of getting blocked by what happens here, but yeah, that's a pretty tiny nitpick. The peaks and valleys and the treble, it's kind of going to work on some tracks, but it doesn't really convey that planar treble that made Timeless and S12 a hit. It's just slightly off. And I think people will say planars have this kind of a sheen to them. There's a planar sound to them that's slightly artificial. Maybe that's what they were trying to tune out. Either way, I think they sort of overcompensated for what they were trying to do and made something that doesn't necessarily have the things that people are buying planars for, including me. That's because of my biggest issue with this one, is it doesn't necessarily sound like the other planars, even though it is. It does sound a little better at higher volume because of the way they did the treble, and I sort of agree that depending on which, especially the atmospheric immersion nozzle, when you bring the treble down just a little bit and then turn the volume up, not really too bad at casual listenings. I definitely didn't mind that at all. But then when you get to a track like Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, it's just very subdued and it's just not as clear, and it sounds very small on Kirin. You A-B to something like Timeless, and it's like a totally different track. And the more that I noticed that between A-Bing, Kirin, and Timeless, the more I sort of felt like this one, it was probably a good first attempt, but in the planar class of 2022, it'd be kind of hard to recommend this set over something like S12 or maybe Dioko, which, are very close in price, but probably going to sound more like the planars that you're assuming are going to sound like, as opposed to this, which is tuned for, something that TRN had on their mind. So, yeah, like I said, just a very, very different experience compared to Timeless, and I don't think it necessarily cut it for the current class of planars that are out there. So that is a quick run through on what I got on Kirin. Definitely, if you're a TRN brand loyalist, this one will probably be okay for you, but if you're trying to decide between S12 and Dioko and the other planar sets, I would probably lean in the direction of those if you're looking for that actual planar experience, as opposed to TRN's take on planar. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.